Well, thank you so much to both of you. Good friends for, I think, close to 30 years, which is kind of scary on all fronts. But we are going to take a look at kind of the landscape, the dynamic for 2016 as we get ready for, and we're already in the throes of it, but as we kind of prepare for what is becoming quite an unusual presidential cycle, both from a candidate perspective, but also from some new issues that have come onto the forefront that I think we'll be hearing about over the course of the next year. So people are focused on the 16 presidential race, and I'm not sure they've figured out how everything is connected. The presidential nominees affect the gubernatorial races, the Senate races, the congressional races, and even the races that you have here at the legislative level. We know that Deborah Wasserman Schultz, the chairman of the DNC, is traveling around the country right now thinking about...
Ditsy Debbie, you mean?
You said that, not me. She's traveling around looking at legislative races and where she can make gains so that in 18, legislators from the Democrat side can redraw the lines in anticipation of 2020. So that's just something that it's fascinating to us to kind of see that happening across the country. There are 12 gubernatorial races in 2016, which is actually quite low. There's 34 Senate races in 16, which is higher than normal. 24 of those are Republican seats, I might add, and 10 of those are Democrat seats, all connected and all impact one another. If the two of you were to weave together kind of a free market message, limited government free market message, given this current presidential race, how would you kind of wrap a bow around that conversation and that dialogue? John?
First, every campaign is about the future primarily. You don't want to litigate the past too much. The future after 2016 is going to be very dire for the middle class depending on who gets elected president. Middle class incomes have completely stagnated under Barack Obama. They started stagnating under Bush. The average middle class family in this country earns about $1,200 less per year in real terms than they did at the start of the Obama administration. We are going backwards. 70% of the American people used to believe they could transfer the American dream onto their children and grandchildren. Now it's about 30%. So I think you start from the fact the middle class is being crushed and their hopes are being obliterated. You move from there to what the solution is. And there is nothing that Hillary Clinton or any of the other Democratic candidates are proposing that's different from what Obama's been doing. Sometimes cases it's worse. So then you have to sell them on the importance of how economic growth was spurred in the 60s and 80s and even in the 2000s. And you have to tell them this is what we have to do again. And then I think you also have to move forward and basically explain how in the world we can reclaim our status in the world. Because there is not a single country in the world where we are more respected now than we were 8 years ago. Not one. If you can name me one, maybe it's Antarctica, depending on who the scientists there are coming from. But that's it. So I think you start from the premise the last 8 years have been a profound disappointment even to people who believed in hope and change, and then you have to paint a more positive vision of how things can be better.
And Grover, do you see any of that being woven into some of the presidential candidates on?
Yeah, our friends on the left like to say the election's all driven by demography. And I would suggest that the demographics have changed, but think of the following. 30 years ago, only 2 states had legal homeschooling. You could go to jail for homeschooling in most of the 57 states. And today, it's legal in at least 50 of them. And there are 2 million people homeschool. One party wants to end that. Given half a chance, they'd be at our throats and they would outlaw homeschooling, and every homeschooler knows that. 10 million people, younger people, have been homeschooled. So you're talking about a constituency that didn't exist 30 years, that the most important decision in their life, one party wants to take away. You've got 3 million children in charter schools now. And Hillary Clinton just said that she's with the unions on wanting to unionize charter schools, which means ending charter schools. So they won't be ruined by the bureaucracy, they'll be ruined by the teachers' union. Parents know that, and charter schools are interestingly more often in swing states. 30 years ago, no state had a shall issue concealed carry permit. Florida was really the first with a comprehensive one in '87. Today, 12.8 million Americans have an active concealed carry permit. 12.8 million. 2 million in Florida. About 800,000 in Pennsylvania. 600,000 in Michigan, swing states. Okay? And everything that somebody with a concealed carry permit knows is, given a chance, the modern Democratic Party would end that, would take that away. And a person who's made the decision to have a concealed carry permit and carry a gun in their purse, their car, small of their back, it's a very important lifestyle issue. It defines that person and his or her relationship with the rest of what's going on. I would add to that vaping. 10 years ago, there wasn't any vaping. Now there are 9 million people who vape. And people who vape spend more hours of the day vaping than nuns do praying. I mean, it's just a, and nuns pray a lot. I mean, the point is that these guys spend a lot of time vaping. And one party has announced, Senator Markey on the floor of the Senate, we're going to ban this. We're going to outlaw it. The FDA is looking to outlaw it. The Democrats are looking to tell 9 million people who think they've made a health choice that they're bad people, and that they're going to end this. So there are a series of freedom questions and constituencies that didn't used to exist. People who drive for Uber. Hillary Clinton has announced she is against the independent contractor economy, the gig economy, the sharing economy, but it's really all about independent contracting and whether everybody has to be an employee. She wants to end that. So each of those things, I think the opportunities and changes and new freedoms people have that they hold dear, that are lifestyle issues, the D's are on the wrong side of a whole series of those.
So liberty issues, foreign policy and our place in the world. Yesterday we heard from Governor LePage, who talked about tax reform. I wonder, as the president of Americans for Tax Reform, where do you see opportunities for true tax reform at the state level in 2016?
Well, we have 7 states with no income tax and 2 states with almost no income tax. And that helps makes it easier for every other state to say, we can't keep doing what we're doing. We can't, a lot of states you'd think of as progressive have gotten rid of their state death taxes because they're just tired of losing older and people who've saved during their life. I think there's a real push there. A number of states have said our goal will be to get rid of the income tax. I think that strategy, which runs into pushback from the other team, but in Kansas, Louisiana, the governor of Oklahoma made this argument. I don't know if we're going to stick with it, but said this is what we want to do. I believe Arizona will soon be formally on the path to zero. If you make the goal, we want to get to zero, how quickly can we do it? Then reducing the state income tax, which is the tax that tends to drive people out of states and businesses out of states. There are other annoying ones too, but that's the visible one that everyone focuses on. Then when there's more income coming in because we finally start growing again and creating more jobs, then the more revenue to the government coming in, there can be a debate. How much of it goes to phasing out the income tax? How much of it goes to the teachers union? And how much, and other various recipients of taxpayer dollars. But tax cuts then become, and permanent tax reduction becomes one of the people at the table. Oh, we have X additional revenue that we weren't expecting. How do we spend it? And beginning to, North Carolina has begun to phase out, and they're very clear. Our goal is to get to zero, and every time there's additional revenue, they grab it and put it in bringing taxes down, which also keeps it out of the hand of the public sector unions and all the various beneficiaries of state spending.
Well, related to that, I think, John, more and more companies are innovating new technologies and methods to respond to those challenges, like the gig economy, like the new workforce. One of those challenges is now how to respond within the fast food demands that President Obama is making for this increase in the minimum wage. We heard also from Governor LePage that they were able to beat back that increase. But how do you see that? How do you see that evolving over the course of the dialogue in the presidential race?
The left is full of non-happy campers these days. You could walk through their deepest optimism at their meetings like Netroots Nation and not get your ankles wet. So, but they're not going to give up, right? Rather than change their mind, they're going to try to change the country. And they have latched on to 3 or 4 issues that are superficially appealing and poll well. The minimum wage is one of those. Certainly there's strong support for raising the minimum wage, but it's inches deep. It's not something that's well thought out. It's an emotional response. So in Portland, Maine, which Governor LePage referenced yesterday, there was a ballot initiative. City Council didn't even want it on the ballot. And it said we're going to raise the minimum wage in stages to $15 an hour. Now, Portland, Maine is sort of the Berkeley of the Northeast. 77% of the people there voted for Barack Obama. About 6% voted for Green or left-wing candidates, and Romney got about 17% of the vote. So we're not talking about a welcoming environment. But the group, the coalition that fought the minimum wage increase, went out and found people who actually owned or managed restaurants, hotels, businesses that people had a connection with the community. And they got them on television to tell their story. Very simply, unadorned. This is what it will mean. It means I have to fire the dishwasher and I'm going to put in new technology. This means I'm going to have to do something to basically let people go, and I'm going to put in something that will prepare the food faster, a machine. And then they also had people on fixed incomes. Maine, as Governor LePage said, is the oldest population. Lots of people on fixed incomes. Their Social Security pension check is all they have. And they would go on television and say, well, look, I'm not stupid. I know if you give somebody a $15 minimum wage, they're going to have to raise the price on my breakfast, my Denny's breakfast. And I can't afford that. There has to be a different way. Maybe we can train these people better. Maybe we can give them more opportunities. But a one-size-fits-all policy, $15 an hour, is going to come right out of my fixed income. And those commercials were powerful. So you had a city that voted 17% for Mitt Romney, voted 58% against the minimum wage increase.
Well, you guys have both mentioned the unions, and I know that when we saw the race turn out in Kentucky, the Republican winning in Kentucky, knowing that at the local level there has been kind of right to work at the county level, building pressure up on the legislature there. ALEC has worked with groups to educate lawmakers on how right to work can positively impact a state when those laws are passed. What do you see happening in states like where it's on the horizon, like Missouri, Kentucky, Michigan, and how is it going to evolve?
Labor issues are going to be central the next couple of years. There's the Supreme Court case out of California that is likely to say you cannot be required to either join a union or pay any portion of dues as a condition of employment. That's $1,000. You talk about how to give middle-class people a wage. You go to the union members and say, if you didn't have to pay union dues, in many states you do if they form a union, a teacher making $50,000 a year is paying $1,000 dues, 2% income. That's a $5,000 raise right there. And it's also $1,000 out of the pockets of the left because they spend that money against us. Looking forward, there are 25 right-to-work states, and there are 24 states that have a Republican governor, a Republican House, and a Republican Senate. And if you put those maps on top of each other, they're almost complete covers. Iowa is right to work, but has House, governor, not Senate. Virginia, right to work, has both houses, but not the governor until Gillespie gets it. And Ohio is completely Republican, but not right to work. But all the other states, it's complete overlap. Becoming right to work is the step towards becoming a fully conservatively governed state, a red state, House, Senate, governor, with expectation that that's not a one-time shot, but will continue. West Virginia, both houses Republican now, not the governor. West Virginia governor cannot veto, can veto right to work, but it's a simple majority to override. January, West Virginia will become a right to work state. Cole, the head of the Senate, is going to be the next governor. He's announced, we're doing this now. We're not waiting till I'm governor. We're doing this now. They have the votes in the House and Senate. Missouri, 2/3, both houses Republican. We had 7 problem people who didn't vote with us to override the Democrats' veto of right to work. Had they been with us, we would have had right to work in that state. We will either get it because some of them rethink this, get replaced, and or when we get a next governor. I think in Kentucky, we have one body and the governorship. We need 5 Ds to vote with us out of the House. I think that's doable, but somebody from Kentucky can tell me if I'm being too optimistic.
Do you think that pressure from the counties that have passed the right to work in Kentucky will help galvanize this?
Oh, it's been a big help. Maine does this too, and we may have a shot at doing some of this, oddly enough, in New Jersey. Some states are structured that allow you to pass right to work at the county level. And the left whines and says, you're not supposed to, but one, we do. And when it passes, all the local people are local elected officials are going, see, this is popular, it's not scary. There's always this fear that if you passed right to work in the next election, the unions would finally get political, like they hadn't been for the previous 50 years. And this time they'd try and hurt us, unlike the last, set of elections. And we've seen when Indiana flipped, nobody lost an election. When Michigan flipped, nobody lost an election. Wisconsin, I mean, the governor got reelected 3 or 4 times for some reason following that not right to work, but first Act 10 and then right to work. So the other team is trying to beat us all the time as well as they can. And if you have a chance to kneecap them, do so, because it makes them slower next time around.
It's also a good government measure. Everyone wants campaign finance reform. Well, we know it's highly unrealistic as well as unconstitutional, because money in politics is like a river going through a course. And you can divert the river, but you can't dry it up. It will find a path.
But it's a minimum to say no stolen money.
That's the key. Thomas Jefferson said it is tyrannical to force someone to contribute money to a cause they find abhorrent.
Yes.
So, every other organization in this country, the Boy Scouts, the Red Cross, the United Way, they do good work voluntarily asking people for money. There's only one private institution in this country that can take your money out of your paycheck without your permission and give it to politicians you don't like or think are actually working against your interests. That's the unions. Yeah. So I think the essence of what people in Wisconsin and other places did was the first start at real campaign finance reform, which is people should not have to be forced to contribute to politicians they don't like or support.
Yeah. Whatever issue is important to you in your state or to a congressman or a senator or a president, make the little secret list of the most important issues. The unions are your biggest problem in achieving your goal on fill in the blank, whatever those issues are, because of who they help elect and how they help, and the structures they fund as well. A lot of groups you think of as that's the group of X. No, it's not. It's the labor union funded group with X standing in front of the podium.
The vast majority of the grievance lobbies that come and yell at the legislature about victimology or some lives matter, not other lives matter, if you look at who finances them, dollars to donuts, it's probably the unions and probably a majority of their money.
Well, sounds like something that we need to focus on with 16 and continue to work on. I have a couple other questions, and then I think Courtney is going to, if there are questions from the audience, I think Courtney's going to have microphones out there, so be thinking about it. Both ALEC and ATR have been working on the criminal justice issues and criminal justice reform over the last few years. ALEC recently participated with Cut 50, which is Van Jones' group, which we were very happy with. And we also put together I think as Phil King mentioned, a conference with the National Black Caucus of State Legislators. We hope to do another one in the spring. We wanted to find common ground on reducing the number of people in the prison system, looking for ways to reform the criminal justice system, and we want to continue to work on that. I know that has become an issue at the forefront, both at the state level and at the presidential level. What opportunities do you see for further action in 16?
Yeah, the focus, the right-left coalition on criminal justice reform, on deciding perhaps we don't need to have this many people in prison for this long, and some of the mandatory minimums were put in because somebody wanted to have a press conference, and at the end they wanted to say, and I really care deeply, and so they said 45 years, and that became law. And the other challenge is mens rea. A lot of federal laws and a lot of federal regulations you can go to prison for. They don't have to prove that you knowingly knew it was illegal or knowingly did anything wrong. It's a violation of the law and you had no idea that it was and you didn't mean to do anything wrong.
And it's often just a federal regulation, not even a law.
So there's 6,000 federal laws, and every time I give the number, somebody comes and tells me they've recounted and it's more. It used to be 2, 4, now it's at least 6,000, and there's somewhere between 200,000 and 600,000 regulations derivative of those laws that can put you in jail, okay? Remember your parents telling you ignorance of the law is no excuse, recite 4 of them. 600,000, this is ridiculous. And the civil asset forfeiture reforms that New Mexico did and several other states have been working on, requiring that they can only steal your stuff if you've been convicted rather than accused of it. And 2, if they do steal your stuff because you were bad, the money doesn't go to the guy who grabbed you, the money goes to the guy into the general fund. So there's no incentive to go grabbing stuff that really does belong to other people and grabbing cars and money. There's a big incentive if a large chunk of that goes to your coffers and your friends, but you only take it away from bad guys because they're bad guys if the money's going into the general fund. There's not the incentive to cheat on that. But the outreach opportunities, because there are principled people on the left who have their own concerns about the criminal justice system. I spoke yesterday at the White House with Van Jones, and the topic was, among other things, Ferguson. Ferguson, the reaction, it was in many ways a tax revolt. There are 21,000 people in Ferguson, and a year ago there were 9,000 warrants out for people not paying tickets. 25% of the cost of the general fund of that budget of that town was tickets. And we had all these emails from the investigation about what happened in Ferguson in terms of why this hostility between the voters and the police. And the memos to the police chief telling him where to put the police and what to police on came from the finance director. We're not making enough money. Put more people on this street. Not they're drunk drivers, put more people on that street. Not, people are driving too fast. There's money to be made. And you could do this, and then we could do this, hire 5 more guys and put them out, collect more tickets, and we could do this 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 days. I mean, she's spelling it out to make it clear, like all the time. And this is a real opportunity. I mean, I gave a speech against taxes in the White House, and people applauded. But it was the cops giving out these taxes, and it's bad for police to tell them you're going to come and serve and protect, and you turn them into IRS agents, right? Your parents tell you, the policeman's your friend. If you get in trouble, go to the policeman. Nobody tells you that about IRS agents. Nobody says they're warm and fuzzy and you can trust them. But we're turning our police in many cities into full-time tax collectors who give out citations and tickets. And in Missouri, they had the... Oh, go ahead.
And in Ferguson, you had an ancient, semi-corrupt power structure in Ferguson that was basically left in charge. There were vast racial disparities because the votes were always cast in obscure spring elections. So in Ferguson, you would have 30% of the voters vote in a normal election, 6 or 7 or 8% in this municipal election. The teacher unions love to have elections for school board and other things in April, right after Good Friday or Easter, so they know who that's going to be voting. So you had a complete imbalance. Now, on the issue of criminal justice, I think we need to be a little careful here.
We should be a lot careful whenever you're in the room with the other.
Well, it's like dealing with a porcupine. The porcupine may be very cute, but it's a little difficult to get to it. I think that the same problem that happened with immigration, we could not pass anything to improve our immigration system, enforcement or anything else, because the left insisted on, quote, the comprehensive immigration bill. And as we know, like Obamacare, 2,000-page bills no longer work. We shouldn't ever pass anything that's a 2,000-page bill. So they insisted it'd be a comprehensive immigration bill with an immediate path to citizenship. Now, we all know what's really at stake here. A lot of people on the left really don't care about immigration reform. They care about getting people to vote, so they're new voters. That blocked a lot of progress that we could have made on enforcement and other issues and visa reform and everything else. The same thing could happen on criminal justice reform. I think discussing whether or not people should be in prison for that long and whether that crime should be treated that seriously is very legitimate. But if a no-go demand, a non-negotiable demand is we immediately have felon reenfranchisement in all 50 states, and the left often claims it can be done nationally, the Constitution says something else, we should pause. I think felon reenfranchisement is a separate issue. Some states have laws that are too tough to get your voting rights back. Some states are too liberal. You know, in Vermont and Maine, you can vote from jail. In Massachusetts, you used to be able to do so until the prisoners formed a PAC.
Yeah.
And the voters said, no, that goes too far. So it's a spectrum, but it's done at the state level. It's not a national solution, and it should be dealt with and analyzed separately from criminal justice reform along the lines Grover mentioned. If they say it's non-negotiable, we also have to have felon reenfranchisement at the same time. What they're really saying is we want more votes.
Well, and we're going to
One second on that. I've been on all the structures here. Felon reenfranchisement has not come up as something that they are either insist on or even pushing.
At the state level, they have.
No, at the state level they are, and every state should deal with it as they want to. It's not an issue I focused on or the broader coalition is. Actually, in criminal justice, we're the ones who want the comprehensive, because if we just get a little bit, it'll just be mandatory minimums on, drug dealers or something. We want mens rea. We want an end to overcriminalization. We want fewer laws and clearer laws, and we want civil asset forfeiture, and we want some criminal justice stuff. And when people get out of prison, we want not to have 57 different kinds of professions that you have to get a license and to
Right.
become a hair trimmer, and rule number one is no felons, okay?
Right.
Felons can't do X, Y, or Z. We'd rather have you out robbing people. I'm
so
not quite sure.
ban the box kind of thing.
Well, the boxes, when it's part of the guild economy of setting up guilds for various jobs, then it's particularly
Like a tree trimmer.
problematic.
You can't be a tree trimmer if you've ever served a month in jail. That's
Right.
ridiculous. On the other hand, forcing all businesses in America to use the box, that's extreme.
No, guys who run banks, I understand their concerns, and nobody should tell them that they have to hire somebody who used to be an embezzler. But the state laws going the other way are not necessary.
Well, I know that within our criminal justice reform task force, we're going to be working on those issues. So if any of you are looking at how to either do the comprehensive or bite-sized kind of efforts there, please reach out to the ALEC staff. Before we open up to the audience, I just want to kind of take it back to that 30,000-foot level on the presidential. And as I kind of look at it, and as somebody who's studied presidential races now for 30 years, we see this kind of ironic dichotomy that's facing our parties. Normally, the Republicans and the GOP is accused, and
Rightly so.
rightly so, that we have this kind of heir apparent to the nomination. We kind of get that
Who's next in
succession
line?
plan and who's next in line, et cetera. This time, the Democrat seems to have the heir apparent, and the GOP has, as we all know, and we're going to see one of those candidates here today at lunch, this kind of full field of qualified and really quite substantial candidates, bringing energy to that side of the race. What do we make of this field? And how do you think that plays for a Hillary Clinton candidacy who seems to be kind of riding to the nomination? And then on our side, where I don't think that we would have a consensus in this room of who would be the nominee.
Nor should we. It is very unusual to have the level of competition as you have in this Republican presidential contest. Republicans tend to believe in competition for everything from business to baseball, but somehow not presidential politics. Thank goodness it's a change. After all, remember, this party, Republicans, from 1948 to 2008, which was 3 generations, nominated for national office, president or vice president, in every election but one, either a Nixon, a Bush, or a Dole. The only exception being 64 Goldwater Miller. So that was clearly something we wanted to move away from. Now, this current presidential race, there are 3 things the media are not telling you. The first thing, the polls are screwy. Now, I'm not saying any individual poll is wrong, and some polls like Quinnipiac and others do a very, very fine job, but 60% of people now rely almost entirely on their cell phones. It's very difficult, and it's illegal to auto-dial cell phones. So polls are much more expensive now if you're going to get a good poll. You also have a lot more junk polls. The second thing the media is not telling you is...
we saw that example when Governor LePage, when he talked in Kentucky and in Maine, when they said he's going to lose by 7 points, and he won by over 5.
The second thing they're not telling you is polls are now part of their making money in the media. The media commissions a lot of these polls, and they don't want to ask a lot of embarrassing questions. So they ask all adults or all registered voters now for the Republican presidential nomination. Well, anyone who's been elected to office knows that doesn't describe the electorate that shows up on election day. You take 100 people in Iowa, how many people will attend the caucus? 15, 20, 25 on a really great day? So you're dealing with a false universe. Secondly, there's one presidential candidate whose name has 100% name ID. I think we know who that is. And he benefits from that 100% name ID, but his support is concentrated upon independents, not Republican registrants. Problem is, independents are barred from voting in 29 of the 50 states for Republican primaries. So that artificially boosts it. You can't vote for someone if it's illegal to vote for him, except for voter fraud, of course, in Chicago and Philadelphia. So I think what you're seeing is a lot of polls that are more variable and more skewed than they've been in the past, because the media won't spend the money to actually get a more scientific poll. They put out a lot more junk polls, and a candidate or candidates in some cases whose strength is exaggerated because the media benefits from building them up. It also corresponds to their, shall we say, negative view of the Republican Party, and at the same time they make money because all of the debates and other things they show attract a lot more eyeballs. So don't let the media dictate your perception of how this campaign really is going. One final point. Most people don't pay attention to presidential politics this far. Nate Silver, who's a political analyst at 538.com, he looked at Google searches that people make before the Iowa caucuses, and what he found is almost nobody was paying attention to the race until about 10 days, 15 days out, after the holidays. Then suddenly interest spikes. 45% of the people in Iowa the last time made up their mind in the last week. He said if you actually looked at the Google searches and their trend lines, and you actually tried to create a poll result out of those search trends, here's what you would find in Iowa today. 80% undecided, 5% Trump, 4% Carson, 3% Cruz, and you go down the list. This is way too early to draw any conclusions from, and as we know from the past, the leader in Republican presidential primary polls at this point in the campaign is almost never the eventual nominee.
Never the nominee. Grover?
I was surprised that with 6 serious governors running, that this was not a contest among governors. I was certain it was going to be, and it's been odd. That said, all of the candidates running have all signed the pledge never to raise taxes. They've all put forward tax reform packages that are dramatic tax reductions. They move towards a single rate. They have a territorial tax system rather than worldwide, which solves a lot of our problems. Takes the corporate rate from 35 down to somewhere between 15 and and 20, goes to full expensing. So while there are all these guys out there talking and yelling at each other, the consensus on the center-right among all of our candidates on a central issue like taxes is almost complete. And they're all running on spending reform and entitlement reform. So whichever one can get passed and hopefully win, we're going to pass the Ryan budget plan, which reforms entitlements, saves $5 trillion in the next 10 years, and takes us from 20% of GDP, federal government, not up to 40, which is what happens if we do nothing, but from 20 down to about 16 over time, because we've reformed all those entitlements. And it's going to make your job a lot more interesting, because it block grants out not just aid to families with dependent children, TANF, but all the welfare programs, starting with Medicaid and moving down to job training, housing, and various other healthcare ones. So the consensus among the Republican candidates, I know one of the reasons they scream so much at each other is they actually agree on so much, so they have to argue about odd things or get attention on odd things. But the healthy part is there's no Rockefeller wing of the Republican Party that wants to go off in some different area than everybody else. This is the Reagan Republican Party, through and through. Even the crazy ones are all inside the Reagan circle of trust. And I think that's extremely helpful. But a lot of the unhappiness you hear from the electorate is people who are angry at Boehner because Romney forgot to win the presidency in 2012. Boehner passed everything you could imagine through the House. We couldn't get much of it through the Senate, takes 60 votes, and Obama would or did veto anything good that came out. And if Romney had been elected, everything Boehner passed would have been a law and Boehner would be a hero. But there was this effort to focus anger at Romney or Mitch McConnell because they, this is not the Tea Party, this is the people who can't do fractions. Two-thirds. Two-thirds. Takes two-thirds to override a presidential veto, and as long as you have a Democrat president, you can't do fill in the blank. Get rid of Obamacare and any number of other important good things. So this frustration was, what they're really mad about is we didn't have the presidency, but it doesn't do any good to yell at him because he's not listening, so you go gnaw on the ankles of the guys who are trying to pass stuff through the House and Senate. We elect a Republican president who's ever the head of the House and Senate is going to look like gold because everything they pass is going to get signed. We're in a great position. We just have to win the presidency. And it's odd because Republicans used to know, okay, we can't control the states. We can't ever have the House. We can't ever have the Senate. 60 years of no Republican control of the House and the Senate from Hoover on. But we get the presidency with some regularity, Eisenhower, Nixon, Reagan. And from there, we'll defend against the left. Today, it's kind of inverted. We have the House for as long as we want it. We really have the Senate. If people in North and South Dakota would remember, you're a Republican state. The Senate is redistricted. I know, I'm looking right at him. The Senate is gerrymandered to give us 60 Senate seats, okay? We need to remember that and organize accordingly and remember to win those Senate seats. But it's the presidency that's the jump ball for the next decades.
Well, and I think we heard from Steve Moore. I mean, it's great to hear your analysis of kind of the tax reform side and what we can get done. We also heard kind of on that pro-growth side of their budgets and the economy that every one of the Republican nominee or candidates has kind of established and kind of moved forward on a pro-growth agenda. John, did you have something else you wanted to say?
About something Grover said about the Reagan Circle of Trust. The Republican Party has within it a group of people that you pretty much know what they're not going to do to threaten our liberties or threaten our economic future. And as a result, we have to look at the strength in the state legislatures and the governors and start to exploit it. Mm-hmm. I don't think 15 years ago you would ever have imagined, anyone in this room, maybe there's a couple outliers, who would have said 15 years ago, there are 99 state legislative bodies in this country, and what is it, 68, 69 are controlled by Republicans now?
69
okay.
of the 99.
That's astonishing. Mm-hmm. I think we need to look to a new future where the state legislatures start pushing back at the power structure in Washington. I know there have been lots of discussions here. About Article 5 methods. I'm not here to endorse any particular one of them. I'm here to tell you, I think we can limit the fears that people have about a push towards a constitutional solution coming from the states. I think we could limit that. You know, you could have a Republican House and a Senate both pass a resolution saying, we guarantee that as long as we're in control, there will be nothing sent back to the states for ratification that will limit your 10th Amendment powers or limit your powers to have federalism. There are ways to do this. You can have a single subject, I think, though, that we can't let the perfect be the enemy of the good. The left, and I go to their meetings, again, they're not happy campers, and what they fear is that you will discover your power in the states, and they fear that you will use it. Yeah. That's what they fear, which is why they're going to try to spend as much time as possible sowing discord in our ranks and presenting false fears about a runaway constitutional
But that's why the war on ALEC, okay?
Yeah. Exactly. That's why they went after ALEC.
Okay, good ideas can only come up from the states. You can't take bad ideas at the state level and bring them to Washington, because if you do it in Virginia and or Vermont and it's particularly stupid, everybody backs off and says, I just learned something. Don't do that. Only good ideas at the state level work their way up to Washington, D.C. Truly stupid and evil ideas can only be done Washington first, like Obamacare, okay? You'd never have taken that and done it in a state and thrashed it out the way they did. If anybody had watched what happened at Obamacare happen just at their state level, they'd never say, let's do that everywhere else. So you have the advantage. When the Ds get control of California and do something destructive, the rest of this country doesn't go, let's do that. But when Wisconsin changes the rules on labor law, everybody else goes, hey, that's something we should look at. We went from 1 to 40 plus states with concealed carry legislation because people said, oh, it's not shootout at the OK Corral. Gee, the number of murders, rapes, all goes down when you pass concealed carry. It's good to fight, for dropping crime. Homeschooling, as it moves along, I don't know what, they're organ harvesting or whatever they thought we were going to do with the kids. It didn't happen.
That's done by another organization.
I was just going to say.
When you can change the country from your state, because if you do something that works in your state and then you nudge the next state over and go, take a look at this, and then 5 or 10 states do it, then it becomes the kind of thing people in Washington go, oh, I have an idea, and their idea is your idea, and you've kind of pre-tested it, like drug tests or something, and if nobody died, meaning nobody lost an election, then they're willing to take it national.
Well, I think I think we've run out of time, actually, and I apologize for not taking a question from the audience. I think it's a great segue to mention what you all already know, that ALEC not only has the Legislative Exchange Council, but it also has ACE, the City and County Exchange. If any of you out there, I know we have ACE attendees here, but if any of you legislators have city council members that you're working with or county execs that you're working with that you think should join that ACE exchange, we are constantly growing that organization. I think the meeting this time was fabulous. And we've got over 300 city and county level elected officials participating with us, and we'd like to grow that to 500 if we can.
I would just like to make a personal note. I have been attending ALEC meetings since the 1980s. I have benefited enormously from ALEC. Part of my job is to cover state and local government, and rather than visit all 50 states, which I still like to do, to come to an ALEC meeting and have everybody come in one place and provide information on what's going on and ideas and what to look for in the future has been just invaluable to me. You are some of my very best sources. Having said that, I was horrified and mortified at the left-wing attack on ALEC, which did far more damage than it should have. I do believe that the left, the last Netroots Nation meeting I went to, you could just see at the panels on ALEC when they were discussing how things were going with their, bullying and intimidation of everyone from Rush Limbaugh on up, you could just see their seething frustration. that they hadn't quite done their job. It's almost like Snidely Whiplash twirling his mustache saying, "Curses foiled again." They know that they did damage to ALEC, but the damage has been contained, the damage has been controlled. ALEC is back. I can tell you from having attended this ALEC meeting, I see a level of optimism and excitement and innovation that I haven't seen before. Happiness, and even a speaker on happiness, Arthur Brooks came. And I know now that you are wiser, and I know that you are better equipped, and I think that they will try this against other conservative organizations. And I think one of the things that behooves ALEC is to let other conservative organizations know how this starts, how it's done, how it can be counteracted, and how ultimately you can transcend the attacks and end up being stronger than ever.
Yeah, but this was the height of praise by the left for ALEC, okay? When you run into other groups that didn't get attacked, you can sort of look at them and go, you know why they didn't attack you? Because you don't do anything.
Except fundraise.
And you never draw blood, which is why they don't throw rocks at you, they throw rocks at ALEC. It is exactly how you tell if you're accomplishing anything in politics, because the other team is not stupid, they're evil. And they're smart enough to know that ALEC has changed the country for good and has the capacity to ramp that up, particularly with the success of more conservative governance state by state. And they're terrified of it, and they are angry with you for succeeding.
Well, we're heading into our 45th anniversary a year from now, which I couldn't be more kind of proud of and excited by. And I thank you for your comments about ALEC. Of course, we would like to have less rocks thrown at us and less attacks.
No, you don't.
But,
No, you want a boomerang. You want the boomerang to come, swing back, and get them.
We have to wrap it up. I have a couple of housekeeping announcements. One, which is very exciting. I think we heard from Senator Debbie Lesko. Is Debbie here this morning? I didn't see her this morning, but she made an announcement at the opening reception where we were raising money for, I think it's called the Turning Leaf, or a new leaf, a domestic violence cause that we wanted to do. We know we've kind of instituted a giving back program everywhere we go, so that we don't just, we want to bring in our economic development to Arizona over the course of this week, but we also want to kind of give back, and Senator Lesko talked about that and passed the hat, so to speak. We raised over $1,400 on Wednesday night. So thank you to all of you. We really appreciate your support for that. And then secondly, as we kind of illuminated on the presidential race, we do have a presidential candidate who is accompanied by Secret Service at lunch today. What that means for us is that it's going to be a little tougher to get in. They will be doing the, quote, mag and bag, meaning they're going to check bags and they're either going to wand you or have you go through a mag. If you don't have to carry a purse or a satchel or a briefcase or something like that, please don't do that. Otherwise, it'll take at least 45 minutes to get everybody back through the room. We're very excited to have Dr. Ben Carson as our closing speaker at lunch. I know there are a lot of workshops and a lot of panels that between now and then that you want to move on to, and I'm getting the high sign here. But we really appreciate it. Grover, thank you so much for your insights. John, of course, it's always fabulous to have these two guys here. And enjoy your day. We'll see you at lunch.